So no meeting really starts until I say, can you guys see my screen? Right?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So I didn't realize you were going to do an intro, Jonathan. So here we go again. My name is Greta. As Jonathan mentioned, I'm a senior UX writer at Talabat currently. I was made in South Africa in the 80s, and I started my affair with words in advertising. And as Jonathan also mentioned, I ran away pretty fast. I think I realized that I had fallen out of love with advertising completely when I got home one day, and I cried about not being able to nail a social media campaign for bleach. So that's when I knew I had enough. It was also around this time that I kind of discovered UX, and I was highly intrigued by it. But at that time, there wasn't many copywriter specific roles in UX design teams. So I just kind of kept it at the back of my head. And then in 2016, I joined Careem in the marketing team, but I had a sneaky little agenda to kind of shuffle into their design team because I had learned about UX and I knew that this was a tech company. So that was 2016, and November 2017, I actually managed to do it. I joined their design team as the first UX writer. And this was really the first team that gave me the opportunity and the space to explore this role. You know, what does it mean to be a writer in a design team? And it was awesome. We built a bunch of really cool shit, and we all learned a lot along the way. And then in January 2019, as Jonathan also mentioned, I joined the UX Writing Hub to be a mentor, where I am kind of helping to shape the future UX writers, and that's really immensely satisfying. And yeah, most recently I joined Talabat during a global pandemic. I've never met my colleagues in person. I've only ever seen them from the front. I might not recognize them if I ever see them from the side. But yeah, so they're a cool bunch of people, and we're just getting started. We also, starting to build some cool content operations for our design chapter. And that's how I got here. So I'm going to talk about this thing called UX writing. As I mentioned, when I joined Careem's design team in 2017, it wasn't a very common role, but it's popping up more and more now. So my goal today is to give you a bit of a glimpse into the role that words play in the product design process. I'll only be able to scratch the surface though. There's a lot out there now. There's many articles, and there are even books, there are even online courses now that you can take. So I'll mainly be sharing my own views and my propaganda that I've formed after reading and listening to a lot of other very smart people. So if we're done here and these things intrigue you or excite you, I would encourage you to do a bit of further reading. I'll also share some books at the end. And then just a note, I have done my best to credit all the ideas in here that I share that I know aren't my own. But if I've missed any, I apologize in advance, and you guys are welcome to call me out on it as well. Cool. Let's get into it. So are there reactions? I want to kind of see how many people have seen this UX writing bingo. So I shared this a few months ago online, and it was actually a bit more passive aggressive because it came out of sheer frustration of having heard all the same things over and over again when you work as a UX writer in a team. And it kind of blew up. Like, a lot of people shared it and a lot of people commented on it, and it made me, one, feel awesome, but two, it also made me realize that not understanding what UX writers do or how to work with them is a global issue. So I think as UX writers, we go by many names as well. So there are UX writers, content strategists, content designers, and we're actually in an interesting position. It's an interesting point of time, because not only do we have to, go to work and do the day-to-day actual writing of the words in the interfaces, we're also busy building the industry day by day. So like doing talks like these, or putting out articles on Medium, or creating a stupid little bingo card, it really actually sets the path for everything that's coming in the future. So it's quite interesting. And if you are an aspiring UX writer or a UX writer, I would really encourage you to please put stuff out there. There isn't enough. There will never be enough. Yeah, so hopefully by the end of this talk, I would have shed some light on the ins and outs of UX writing, so that no word person in the product design team would ever have to win at this game again. So most user interfaces could probably be described as consisting of text elements and design elements. And I think this is where we make the first mistake. By splitting up design and text, we're just reinforcing this idea that they're two completely separate things, when in fact, I firmly believe that they're part of the same single experience. No user sees them as something different. They go through the experience as one thing. And when we do that, when we split up the text and the design, what happens is that the wireframes and the early designs end up looking something like this. And the copy is thought to be something that should come a little bit later. So, your designs end up with lorem ipsum. I think it's because while we're designing, we're often more focused on the design of the containers that would hold the content, and not the content itself. And I think it's because the moment you open those design tools, you start making design decisions immediately. And then most of you know, by the time you send your designs to a writer, and the writer, the person at the other end of the room, fills in the real copy, and all your designs break, and you firmly believe that writers are out to get you and ruin your career. But that's not the case. It's actually just a lack of consideration for the content being created in parallel with the design. Because the truth is, words are also design elements. If you're a designer, you also have, together with your buttons and your colors and your icons, words are also the things that you use to design with. And when you're writing, you are designing. You're actively influencing people's experience when you consider what content to show them and how you want to show it to them. So that said, I have formulated a little definition of UX writing of my own. For me, UX writing is what happens when you consciously consider the words you're going to use in your interface in order to make the digital experience more user-friendly. And what I mean by this is the act of consciously considering is to really think about the conversation you want to be having with your user, digging deeper into who they are, what they're thinking, what they're feeling, how they want to be spoken to. And you can do this with user research, user interviews, A/B tests, conversation mining. You can have a look at what other brands are doing, really considering the architecture, what comes first. If this is the headline, what kind of call to actions should follow it? These kinds of things. Inclusive design as well, making sure what you're saying is not leaving anyone out. Localization, is what you're writing easy to localize in other markets if they end up in other markets. And then the words in an interface. So if we do regard this words in the interface as a conversation between you and your user, the words would be the kind of things that you would say as a product in a conversation. And these things appear on your titles, your buttons, your labels, call to actions, all of these things, even the FAQs, in order to make a digital experience more user-friendly. Now, I think content, UX writing content, and this is touched on by Tori Podmajersky, I can't say her surname, when she wrote in Strategic Writing for UX, she notes that UX writing is the sweet spot between your organization's goals and the goals of your users. So it closes the gap between it makes those two meet. So you can ask, can a person do the thing that they came here to do quickly and easily? That's how you can kind of know that your words are making the experience more user-friendly. Now, that said, there are also a few things that UX writing is not. I thought I would just touch on this. Firstly, it's not magic. As much as we appreciate the sentiment whenever people ask, can you do your magic? I think it kind of devalues the effort that goes into writing. It's quite a lot of work. So yeah, it's not a small task. There's this famous quote, I think it's attributed to Mark Twain, but I'm not sure. It might have been attributed to other people as well. But it goes, I apologize for the long letter, but I didn't have time to write the short one. Just kind of emphasizing how tedious it can be to make text shorter, and that's not the other way around. UX writing is not the sprinkles on top that comes after you've baked the cake. It's not a quick fix for a bad experience, because no amount of sprinkles can fix a badly baked cake. And then lastly, and I think this one is quite important, UX writing is not reserved just for UX writers. It's the responsibility of everyone who's building the product. Just like you would raise a ticket for, alignment issues, or when the wrong shade of blue was used for a component, you also need to start tuning in to the words that we use in the app. So it's really the responsibility of everyone. Cool. Now, are there any questions yet?
No, people are just they liked your what you've shared. There's some folks have seen it, and yeah, loving the examples. The cake one, quite a few people, but no questions yet. Great summary. Keep going.
I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing. Anyway, we'll see. Cool. So with all of that,
while we're there, we had a quick one snuck in. What's the difference between writing for design and writing for marketing?
Okay, so there's quite a lot of literature about that online already, but I think high level, just to quickly touch on it, I would say the biggest difference is when you're writing for a product, you're writing for the user's experience. So you really consider clarity first over the cleverness of the copy. Whereas in marketing, you might want to be a little bit clever and creative first and hook people, and then only later explain that they've just signed up for a lifetime of spam. So that's the first thing I would say. It's just how you start. You start with just trying to be as clear as possible to the user. Where if you were using super clear copy in marketing, ads would be pretty boring, I guess.
Cool, makes sense. That's it. No more questions for now.
I actually wrote a Medium article about the differences that I found between copywriting for marketing and writing for UX.
Maybe you can share that one after. There has been one more squeezed in as well. Do you think that a developer should develop a product after sharing ideas with a UX designer, or should it be done at the later stage? Or does that come soon in your talk?
A developer.
Yeah, the question was, should a developer develop a product after sharing ideas with UX designer, or it should be done at a later stage? I don't know what that means. Sorry, I've just read it literally.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. It's we're if you're lucky, you're in cross-functional teams, right? So ideally you're an engineer with a designer and a product manager on a team, and all of this kind of happens in parallel.
It's more of a human-centered, how do we do human-centered design question as opposed to UX writing specifically, right? It's more, we should have evidence-based, and then as opposed to, I mean, developers, unless they're out there doing research. That's fine.
I'll get to the UX writing in the user-centered design process as well.
Sure. One last question before you go on. Sorry. when you write for design in, say, English and then translate to another language, it breaks that experience. Anything to keep in mind? Any tips?
Well, lucky, Hussam is going to touch a little bit on localization
Cool.
at a later stage. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So let's keep going. Cool.
But yeah, I mean, just for like a quick answer, if you're writing in English first, you have to try and always write with localization in mind, right? So don't get too idiomatic or use too many weird slang expressions. You have to consider that these things need to be localized, and the person on the other end doing the translation might not have all the context that you have. So if you just use plain language throughout, it would be easy to translate, but Hussam will touch on that. Cool. Now, before more questions sneak in, I want to present you with two rather provocative statements, in my opinion. The first one is very common, and you've either heard it if you're a writer, or you've said it if you're a product manager, and that's that people don't read. The second one, it might seem a little bit more like a matter of opinion or a dig at the art of writing, but this is actually meant to imply that good UI copy should be common sense. So people don't read, and writing good UI copy is not hard. Now, if people don't read and writing good UI copy is not hard, what am I doing? What is the role of UX writing in the design and development process, right? It kind of sounds like anyone could do it or no one should do it. So I'm going to unpack these two statements in the hopes that we learn something after that. It was pretty late when I put these slides together, so let's see. So the first one, people don't read. Now, I often encounter this statement when people are expecting me to shorten the copy in an experience. You know, I would have a suggested line, and then the response would just be, people don't read, we need to make it shorter. And then that's partly true, but I do think it's the wrong argument for that specific case, but that's a whole other presentation. So in 1997, Nielsen Norman did an eye tracking study called How People Read Online. And they discovered that people rarely read stuff from top to bottom. That was 1997. The second edition of that report came out last year, and nothing's changed. People still don't read online, but I bet you knew that. So how do people navigate their way through digital experiences? Because it's definitely not like this, or like this, or this. So if people don't read, how do they progress and complete the tasks that they come to the experience for? So I think in a way this statement proves itself, because if you had read the full sentence, I think it would be more something along the lines of this. People don't read, they scan. In that same Nielsen Norman report, they found that even though this, seemingly chaotic scanning behavior may come across as laziness, people are lazy, they don't read. It's actually a very, very efficient information-seeking behavior that allows users to avoid information overload. So people don't read, they scan, and this scanning text for information is actually super strategic. So they actually read very strategically, and they do this in a variety of ways. There are, as I mentioned, it was an eye tracking study, so they kind of mapped or plotted all the different types of patterns that can occur when people interact with the digital experience. Now, what actually happens, you rarely follow just one pattern when you visit a website or you're using an app. It's usually a combination of patterns that will follow. So most common one is the F pattern, where people just kind of start enthusiastically and then drop off and skip down, just more downwards. The other one is the layer cake pattern, where people jump from heading to heading. Spotted pattern could be where there might be bolded text or different colored text or links, so they kind of jump from those words to the next. And then there's the elusive commitment plan, the one where, which I think we often mistakenly design for. The exhaustive review pattern. Now, although this one can seem like the user is really, really engaged and they're reading from top to bottom, this is actually often caused by really complex content. So maybe the user had to go back and reread it and back again. And then the list and the section bypass patterns is where people skip parts that either repeat or for some reason they believe that it won't be helpful. And there's the lawnmower pattern on pages with really distinct cells of content. So you can imagine like an e-commerce site. People actually scan from left to right, drop down one row, and then from right to left. And then the zigzag pattern where people jump from the center content to the sidebar, which is actually more applicable for web content than mobile. And then interestingly, they also tested it with Chinese and Arabic. And they found that the patterns don't change. All these patterns still exist. They're just flipped if it's bidirectional. So that's pretty cool. That's good to know. And knowing this, knowing how people read, means that we can write and design for this, right? If we know people scan, we should be designing for that instead of saying people don't read. And a couple of ways we could do this is by using clear and noticeable headings and subheadings to break up the content and then label sections so that people can scan for the stuff they're most interested in. Place the most important information up front. This is also called front loading, so that people understand the information quickly while they scan your page or your screen. Use formatting techniques like bulleted list and bold text to allow the eyes to find the most important information really quickly if they want to explore more. And then always, always, always use plain language to keep information clear and useful and your writing efficient. So that said, on to the next statement. Are there any questions?
Yeah, we've got a great question. Oh. How do you incorporate content testing with users?
So there are also various ways where you can do that. You can test before you design anything, or you can test within a prototype with your designs, or you can test after with A/B testing. So I want to like not go against what I said and split content and design. And I think you should test the content when you test the design, right? So make sure your designs have the content that you intend to show users. Go and test your apps and your screens and your flows with that. And then come back and iterate in parallel with the design. If it is something like a website where like maybe I can only think of the government services, the UK.gov, where there is a lot of information. People need to come to the website for information about, you know, how to get a new driver's license or stuff like that. You could just write that out, print it out, and show it to people. And then there are many ways you can test copy. There are things like the highlighter test, or there's a close test where you get people to fill in the blanks to see if they comprehend where the sentence is going. So yeah, there are ways.
So I was just going to do a follow-up. So are you saying that it needs to be in parallel with the design process? So if you have more time, you do more. If you do less, it's not a separate round of testing.
Look, you can do. So for example, now at Talabat, I want to do some testing for content just to kind of understand the concepts that people understand or the words they use, which will eventually inform our writing guidelines, right? So this might not necessarily go into the app as the call to action or the text on the button, but the insights I might learn from that, you know, like do people understand shops? Do they prefer shops or stores? You know, do they prefer vendor or restaurants, and these kinds of things? so that when I write the guidelines, I can be like, we always use restaurants because studies have proven that that's what people relate to more, or some of the user testing we've done. So you can do stuff in parallel that's not, dependent on a launch, imminent launch of a feature. You can do stuff to learn a bit more about.
And is
general.
that challenging? Like if, I mean, for example, we've got quite a lot of things to test in the design. We don't test everything, obviously. There are things that can be done outside of a cycle, but we then prioritize design. This will add to the load of how much we're trying to test with a limited time with users. Is that something you found challenging, working with design teams and dev teams to say, hey, we need to test this? Or is it like standard?
Yeah. So often, so I've been in different situations. It depends, I think, how the team is set up or, the capabilities. But there are, instances where maybe A/B testing for Android or for iOS in particular is not that easy. It's not that simple, even though it's, maybe testing whether the call to action should be buy now or have a look. Even though it's just one small thing, launching that test, launching like it to 50% of your users show one thing and then 50% see the other thing, it might be a lot more complicated than it sounds in the back end or, within the team setup. So it can be challenging, but I try to just kind of latch myself onto, like, if there is a design, a usability, test coming up, and there will be people who we're interviewing, I try to kind of latch onto those research sessions and squeeze in a few questions of my own.
Cool. Thank you.
Cool. So on to the next statement. So the first one was people don't read. This one is writing good UI copy is not hard. So Scott Kuby, in his book called Writing for Designers, says, writing is just thinking plus typing. So if you can think and you can type, then you can write. And he goes on to say that the writing process is basically just having thoughts in your head, writing them down, and then doing that over and over until the writing is done, which is not wrong. It's just a little bit oversimplified, because for those thoughts to come into your head, you'll need a lot of context. And for a UX writer, context looks a little something like this. It's the everything that informs the words, whether it's written by a writer or an engineer. You need to know what's going on if you want to communicate it well. So these are, the type of questions that you can, if you're a product manager or a designer or engineer, these are the kind of questions that you can expect from a UX writer. We need to know, how did the user get there? What's the objective of the screen? What did the user come here to do? What do we want them to do? Because as I mentioned, like, your users' goals and your business goals should meet. Is this a quick fix until we can tackle the real problem? Is there a larger problem? What other parts of the experience is influenced by this? So you can't just, write your little line of text that people need right now. You can't just write it in isolation, because it might have an effect later on in the experience as well. And then, I would actually go as far as to argue that 80% of my time is spent on hunting for context and inspiration. Only 5% of my time is spent on the actual writing. And then the other 50% is spent just Googling simpler synonyms or simpler ways of saying all the techie things. Yeah, so with that, the main goal of UX writing is to produce clear, efficient, and useful copy. Now, Google's team of writers they say clear, concise, and useful in their Google I/O talk of 2017. And since then, if you wake up any UX writer in the middle of the night, they'll be like, clear, concise, useful, clear, concise, and useful. But I've actually replaced concise with efficient, because I found too often that people think concise just means short. So, you'll get feedback like, make it shorter, when really it's actually about being more economical with your words and making sure every word has a job on the screen. You know, no word is there without a purpose. So what we mean with clear, efficient, and useful is that clear copy is written in plain language. It's really simple to understand, and to help the user understand what exactly is going on, what happened, why are they seeing the message that they're seeing, or what should they do next. It's efficient in the sense that it's to the point, as I mentioned, economical and written for scannability, like we touched on earlier. And then useful is about telling the user how to complete their task. Can they move forward from this point? And to demonstrate these foundational principles in action, I'm going to walk you through a little editing exercise. Now, this is also adapted from the Google I/O talk. It's pretty cool. I'd really recommend you check it out. Cool. And this little exercise is a little shout out to my fellow Talabatis on the call. So check it out. Cool.
There's
so
quite a few.
What?
There's quite a few of them.
Cool. So let's say someone is searching for a specific dish on a food delivery app, and they get this error. Invalid input, there was an error retrieving results. So a user can't really do much with this, right? It's not clear what happened. It's not efficient, and it's really not useful. There's no way for the user to move forward. So if we apply the principle of clarity, we might land on something like this. Oh, it's a search error. Okay, you've entered an invalid keyword. Great. So it's a bit more clear. I understand that the action I took led to this error. So at least I know which action it was. Plus we made it a little bit shorter, so that's a bonus. It's efficient-ish. But in the words of a product manager or designer, can we make it even shorter? The answer is yes. Yes, we can. But you see what happens here. Now we've lost a bit of the clarity. And it's definitely still not useful, but we've had to trade clarity for more, efficientness. So you'll notice this happens quite a lot. So how can we help the user move forward from this point? So if we apply the usefulness principle, it might look something like this. No results found for donut burger. Check your spelling and try again. So now, again, we can see the change made the message longer in character count again. So again, we've lost what we would call efficiency, or conciseness, but each word still has a very distinct job. Each word is still very clearly telling you how to move forward and what happened. And at least now you know what mistake you made, so you can correct it so that you might find this. Yes, it exists. Cool. And then finally, after you've done clarity, efficiency, and usefulness, now we can finally try and look, for a way to incorporate the brand voice into the messaging. And as I mentioned earlier, I think that's the main difference between UX writing and marketing writing, because now first we do the check, like, is it super clear? Can people move forward? And then we kind of weave in a bit of personality. So now we're saying we can find what you're looking for, try a different keyword, and watch out for sneaky typos, something like that. And then, as I mentioned, you'll notice there's this tension between these principles. One might come at the cost of another, which is always going to be the case, right? And it will be up to you to kind of figure out which balance you want to strike and which trade-offs you're willing to make. Remember, we said UX writing is that sweet spot between your organization's goals and the goals of your user. So you'll need to make that call on what works for your brand and what works for the product or the feature that you're launching. Don't expect too much is what I'm saying. It's never going to be fully clear, fully efficient, and fully useful. Cool. See? Easy peasy. Writing good UI copy is not hard. But just like with the people don't read statement, I feel like the most important part is left out here, which is that if you struggle, then there might be a bigger UX problem that no amount of editing is going to fix. So the sooner you consciously consider, as we mentioned, the words in your interface, the sooner you can kind of iron out the kinks in the overall user experience. Which brings us to the next topic, which is when to include a UX writer in the process. And I think this is quite a common question people get asked a lot, because now the company hired a UX writer. Woo-hoo! It's like, okay, but how do we work with you? When do we include you? But I feel like this sentence assumes that you have a UX writer, and it might imply that you have the permission to ignore the words if you don't have a UX writer. So I'm going to just change this to when to start thinking of the words. Now, there's a Chinese proverb that goes, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. And I know, like, UX writers often, we say things like, you should have included me sooner. We should, at the start of the project or at the discovery phase, or, even things like as soon as possible is pretty vague. So I would argue that the best time to include a UX writer is obviously at the discovery phase, but if you can't, or if you couldn't, the next best time is now. It should never be too late. We really need to try and do the most whenever we get involved in a project. And it's easy to kind of waste time on discovery or figuring out when to include the UX writer, and in fact, just include the person and save the time of catching them up on the context later. Just get them involved whenever you can. Just as long as you understand that the later in the project you include a writer, the impact of the words diminishes. After all, we're not magicians. So as long as everyone is on board with that, you can develop frameworks of like where you are in the project and what you can do, what is feasible as a writer, or what you can expect from the words in each phase of the process. So Rachel McConnell, in her book, or she wrote the book, Why You Need a Content Team and How to Build One. This is not in that book, but this is from a Medium post she recently wrote, where she kind of indicates how content can be brought into every part of the user-centered design process. So you'll see, like in the beginning, when we empathize people and try to understand their problem, we might also, within the same user interview that you're having to inform the design, you can also have the UX writer or the content person there, or if it's just you, just start to focus a little bit on the language things or the messaging, and try to understand, what you obviously do this in design anyway, what are their needs, but also try to understand how they might want to be spoken to. And you'll notice like defining the key messages can happen as early as the ideation phase. It's not at the end, once you've tested everything and now you're building the final, you're shipping the final design, now you put the main key messages. No, you can already start to define what is it that we want to get across from the ideation phase. And then I think if you include the real copy from the get-go, your prototypes, will have accurate, considered copy. And I think your test results will be a lot more comprehensive, because your users will have been exposed to your intended messaging and not something that looks good in the design. Cool. Then there's also this practice.
Sorry, can we just have a few questions?
Sure.
I mean, I just wanted to kick off going a few slides back. I had a question. I'm not sure if you're covering it later on or not. You spoke about get a writer as soon as possible. And I've worked in, like a very large organization that had a whole team. Currently, I work in an organization that doesn't have one. Where does a writer sit in terms of a hierarchy or an org chart for whatever, say a tech company or a product company or any other one? Yeah, that's kind of question number one.
Okay, so I think it depends. Firstly, it depends on your resources, right? But also, Jonathan Coleman from Intercom, they have a very interesting structure where they call their UX writers content designers, and they are responsible for exactly the same things as the designers. Even, you know, their career path, their performance reviews, they have the exact same things that they need to fulfill, and they get paid exactly the same, because the writers are also designers. They're also responsible for creating the exact same experience as the designers. So they should be in the same team as the designer, report to the same person as the designer, have the same career path as the designer, because they're doing the same thing. For me, that's a more ideal.
So are they saying they own the research, the iteration, the testing, the working with the dev team, just like a designer would?
Yeah.
They're
So you'll have
responsible for that in different levels of seniority?
yeah, and they're only working on one project at a time, the same as designers often do. So it's not, because a common scenario like so it's the same in Careem and the same with Talabat now, it's like I'm the only UX writer, right? So I work across multiple teams. I'm a lot more divided. Even the impact that I can make will never be 100% if it's like this, right? I can never devote 100% of my time to fully understanding everything about this feature that we're launching as much as the product manager or the designer has.
Right. So you're saying they should be integrated and report to a head of a VP of design or whatever. They're not their own separate UX writing department and then report to
Yeah.
chief design
So
officer.
it's interesting. Yeah, it's interesting when you think of are you guys familiar with the UX maturity model that we see in companies, right?
Yeah.
And I think what's interesting about the content one is initially you want to establish content as a thing, and it's kind of its own separate thing, because there's just one or two or then three of you, then four, then five. But then as soon as you become more and you can actually be a lot more embedded within your squads or your domains, it dissolves and it's not its own thing anymore. It's just the same as the design and the product, which is interesting. So you're building something just to make sure it goes away.
Cool. We had on a different topic, we had another question just around the check your spelling. This type of experience would require functionality from product side. So is this error picked up by product, or is it something that was come up with by UX writers?
I can explain that in more detail,
Yes.
Jonathan, because I wrote that question.
Yeah.
So Greta, I liked your example. It was very nice where you showed, you know, how you were looking at the different elements and just gave that example of check your spelling as a solution. So this is where I think you're talking about the involvement of UX writers at the beginning when you are designing an experience, because then you're able to pick something like that up. But if you weren't and you were just coming in later on at a stage, which we see a lot of UX writers are, and they're sort of helping us write error messages or pop-up messages, and you come up with something like check your spelling because as the recognition of that error, that in itself is something that requires functionality. So that sort of functionality then impacts product design, it impacts functional specs definitions, it impacts development as well. So where do you see those sort of recommendations coming up? Because it's easy just to write that sort of stuff, but to actually build it in to the app for it to recognize, oh, this is an error due to a spelling, or this is an error due to something else similar of that sort. That's where sometimes things come back to you guys, and it's like, no, sorry, we can't implement this. So how does that work? And is it something, are those the type of content pieces that you can come up with when you're involved much earlier, or because later on it might be something that actually gets delayed or delays a project or something like that, if that makes any sense?
Yeah, so I think I understood what you're asking. The thing is, yeah, if I'm involved earlier, I have visibility on the roadmap and what we're building, right? And in the very early meetings, I might say, oh, we just get the user to check their spelling. And then it would be early enough for the product manager or the engineer to say like, no, we don't have that functionality yet. This will come in the next sprint, or that will come in the sprint after that. And then I'll be like, oh, okay, so right now I just need to write copy for what functionality actually exists. Where if you ask me way later after everything is built and I go, la, 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 I'm going to write this really cute copy. And then I send it back. And then people are like, oh, no, that's not actually feasible. Please go back and rewrite it. Then we've wasted time.
Yeah.
Cool.
Like
so I guess this is just showing the importance of getting UX writers involved right at the beginning, because being able to, you know, bring in those sort of insights, which really make it a nice experience, is an experience that's directed from UX writers versus, you know, much later on. So yeah, thanks for that.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. The next question was, what should a UX writer do in their first 60 days or month in a new organization? I mean, I suppose it's going back to your maturity, right? It's the same as the design question. What should a designer do? It depends on the maturity of the organization.
Attend your onboarding meetings. So I think the book, I mentioned the book in the end as well, Strategic Writing for UX. She actually has, in that book, she has a really nice, you know, the first 30 days, the first 60 days, and then 90 days, everything you can get into place to really get the most of it, if you are actually the first UX writer in a team. But I think the most common one that pops up is relationships. So because you're going to be the only one working across multiple squads or domains or teams, it's really important to know who is responsible for what and where you have to, you know, who do you need to know to get invited to that meeting. And the problem is a lot of people don't know what UX writing is. Yeah, and that's not their fault, right? It's not like you're hired, you show up for your first day of work and you're like, I'm here, people, and everyone's like, oh, finally. Not, people aren't really sure what to do with you in those first couple of weeks. So I would say if you could, you know, meet with as many people as possible and try to figure out what they do, how they do it, how what you do fits into that in a, you know, one-on-one situation. And then maybe communicate that as well to the broader organization of how, if you've been around for a couple of weeks and you understand how the, you know, how the sprint cycles work, how they approach the user-centered design process, where you can wiggle your way in there and then present that back to the organization and say, this is what I'm here to do and this is how I'm going to do it.
Cool. Another one, how does a UX writer contribute to naming products and features?
Yeah, so that is unfortunately part of our job. I'm just saying unfortunately because I really suck at it, but it's an interesting one. So something I've found is naming a product or a feature becomes trickier the later it gets, the longer you've been working on it without a full name. So for example, you know, when I was at Careem, we working on, you know, peer-to-peer credit sending. So people can send, so I have money in my wallet and I can send you money. And we just kept calling it peer-to-peer for the longest time, that when it came to, you know, thinking of how we're going to, what does that look like in a call to action, or what will we name this thing? It becomes a lot more difficult to step out of like, what is the actual functionality of this thing? Should it have a name? And this is the other thing, like if you can, there's this awesome talk by the UX writer, Andrew Schmidt from Slack. And he says like, if you can avoid naming things, rather do that. If you can describe the thing rather than name it, stick to that, because that's something that's going to come and bite you in the behind later on. You know, if you have legacy things that were named that, and then old emails are still getting sent with that name in it, you know, or maybe some things start to sound similar, like what's the difference between the loyalty program and the subscription program? Yeah, so if you can avoid naming things, do that. But if you have to name things, I would say start quite early. You can do research as well, like trying to figure out what kind of names work. You can show things to people, you can present them with naming options, and try to learn what they understand from it.
Cool. Another one, I'm going to translate what I think it means. So Ahmed, Saeed, if you could just type. I think what he's asking is, how do you ensure consistency across the, the language in terms of terms for a doc, like do you have a document or a reference for the team? What's the, I don't know, the ops or the system side of UX writing?
Yeah, so you would create what we call a style guide, content style guide, which is quite common, especially in brand. Brands also have a brand style guide of how to use the logo. Same with the design team would have a design system of how to use components, when to use icons, what's the size or typography. This is the same, these are the words we use. This is how we write dates and times. This is how we capitalize. We use British English, this kind of thing. So you'll have a guide. But in my experience, no one reads it, but you create it anyway. So if there are questions, you can always refer people back to the guide, or another way to do it is to incorporate it with the design system. So if you're, let's say, in your design system, you're talking about modals or cards, components, to have the writing guidelines for these components right there with, next to the components. So if you're designing a card, this is what it looks like. This is the guidelines for the writing, and messages should sound something like this. Remember, we always use sentence case, not title case. So that could be cool, because then, the references are right there. But yeah, there are quite a few famous style guides or voice and tone books, voice and tone guides out there that companies have.
Some great questions. So I'm going to keep going if you don't mind. Another great question. Again, I'm going to interpret it, Axel. I think I'm interpreting it right. Similar to like a design question to ask, like, what should we test? We don't test all designs. Similar with writing, what are the triggers for these tests? In other words, how and when do you decide what copy you want to test and what not to test?
Yeah. So same as with design, I guess, or features or functionality, I start with a hypothesis. So, because there's always a few different ways you can write something, right? So let's say you want to get users to subscribe to your loyalty program. You can, incentivize them. And maybe the copy that you want to write leads with, get 20 dirhams whenever you sign up with this. So that's one way. So the hypothesis would be people want to be incentivized to join the loyalty program. So you lead with this reward, this incentive. Or another hypothesis could be that no, people just want to feel like VIPs. So maybe the copy should be a little bit more around something like, join the exclusive club to get points, and also you'll get 20 dirhams. So your hypothesis would be around what, the value proposition that people would be interested, or which value proposition would convert more, I guess. So I start with a hypothesis the same way than a designer.
Yeah, great. And last one, if you don't mind, we'll keep going.
There are two other writers who also are going to speak, so I would love for them to also.
Yeah, sure. So maybe let's keep going. We'll save it. Yeah, keep going.
Because they can also contribute to the answers from their perspective. So I'm almost finished, promise.
Sure.
Cool. So, yeah. So include a UX writer anytime, every time, just as long as you understand that the impact can diminish. So then there's also this practice of getting the writing done first, which is called content first design, or content led design, it's also called. So that means you do all the content before any wireframes are even created. So you'll start this in a text editor. It's quite an interesting exercise. And it's a really good way to focus on the words without getting too carried away with the design decisions that, instantly happen with the moment you open Sketch or Figma. And it's also much faster to get alignment on all the content between the stakeholders. So, you can have a document with all the content that you plan to have, all the the story, the narrative, the value propositions, and you can share this around. And if everyone agrees on it, then you have your content. You just take that and you put that into containers instead of designing containers first and then trying to fill it with content. Okay, right. This is where I hand over to Melissa and Hussam, because I've said a lot now, and I believe, or I realize that it all sounds really, cool in theory, but in practice it might look quite differently. And so the two people I've invited, we've all worked in different kind of environments. I have actually worked with Hussam before at Careem, but now we have different perspectives. So everyone has words in their experience, but having a UX writer is a luxury. So that's why I asked the two of them to just come and share their experiences. And then, yeah, if you guys have any questions for them, do feel free to ask them as well. So I think, Jonathan, do you have to give permission to?
Sure, that's
Melissa?
already done.
Yeah.
I should. No. Do you wanna present, or do you want to tell me to skip slides?
If you could just handle the slides for me.
Cool.
Cool. So am I on? Yes, I'm on. Great. So hi everyone. Thanks for being patient and listening to the lovely Greta talk. It's been great. I even forgot I had to present at some point because I was so into this whole process. I'm like, can I just sit and listen? But no, it's been great. And thanks, Jonathan, Nada, everybody. Fun fact, I actually work with Nada. So this may have been a string pull. No, I'm kidding. Greta and I actually got in touch probably about a year ago while you were still at Careem. Yeah, we just happened to sort of meet each other on a Slack call, Slack group. And yeah, so we've been friends ever since. Anyway, just starting off quickly. So my name's Melissa. I've been doing content for more than 10 years, hardcore content. Before that, I was sort of pretending to do content. I thought I did content, but it didn't exist as a thing till quite many years ago. And right now what I'm doing is I'm actually working with a really cool new product that's coming to the market very soon. It's called Yap. We can talk more about it afterwards, maybe in the Q&A. But yeah, it's a fully tech-first product, and as with any startups, we're going full steam ahead to have the product out as soon as possible, even though there's a pandemic happening as we speak. But yeah, we're full steam ahead. But while I'm at it, what I've noticed is that as with any startups, and I know this is where most of us thrive or currently work, resources are very limited. So a lot of organizations don't really believe in investing in UX writers, from the very beginning. And I know that Greta has talked about this a few times, but it's really hard to convince somebody to say, get a UX writer. I know Nada struggles with this on a daily basis, but as somebody who heads up content for this company, I wear multiple hats. Like, it's super easy for me to do strategy. I breathe it in and out. I've been doing it for years. UX writing, to be very honest, I'd never even heard of it till before I joined Yap. I thought it's just something that copywriters do, and except they do it for an app. But now that I'm working on it like sort of almost every day, I'm just like, why is this not a thing? Like, why is this not a bigger thing? Why aren't more people talking about it? I'm sure everyone on this call today has faced, a similar predicament at your organizations, but I kind of wanted to do a quick exercise, maybe a show of hands or a show of emojis or whatever you want. So I know I'm not alone. So Greta, if you could just go to the next slide. All right, so first question, I'm just gonna say next, yeah. If you've ever been consulted last in the design process, feel free to send across an emoji. This happens a lot for us. Referred to as a copywriter, that's another one of them. Every time I, present something or come up with something, it's always, yeah, as a copywriter, but this is design. Well, I think what happens is people need to understand that, there's more than just writing involved in UX writing specifically. It's something that we've learned, like I've especially learned on the job, but you know, more companies need to see that this is something that needs to be included even before or even during when a product is in its prototype level. The next one is ask to use placeholder copy. I know that a lot of us have spoken about this today. Placeholder copy, and I'll talk more about this in just the next slide. It's the absolute worst thing that you can do to your to your app or to your product. Do not use that, and I'll tell you why. And finally, sound cool. Everybody, especially when you're, you know, coming new, you're a new brand that's, you know, waiting to launch. Everybody wants to sound cool. Everybody wants to use magical words and, you know, unicorns, but really you have to understand, like, read the room. You know what I mean? And this could come down with, I think Hussam will talk about this in localization. What's cool in another country might not be cool here. Everybody's definition of cool is different as well. So, I mean, these are things that every one of us has heard at some point. And well, if you've heard any of these or all of these, then welcome, you're part of, you know, the UX Writers Unseen Club. And I'm happy that you're all here, but no one knows you're here. That's the problem. Right, moving swiftly on. I know that Greta touched upon this just before she handed over to me. Content first. I'm just going to quickly talk about what we do at YAP, where I work, and why I think content first works for us as an organization. So as I said before, I'm actually a content, I work in strategy. So this is my bread and butter. This is what I do on a daily basis. But what's helped me with UX writing and more so the UX strategy is that my life is already so much better knowing that this is the content, okay, and this is what's gonna go. You know, we've created processes and workflows that literally put content ahead, and it's kind of like the, you know, it makes the designer's life much easier, right? As a UX writer, I can't stress this enough, involve yourself early on. I know that many of you are maybe just starting out as UX writing or want to get into UX writing from maybe a previously held position such as a copywriter or a content person. Involve yourself early on, whatever is the process. Be your UX designer's best friend, right? So this process, once it's in place, everything else is gonna fall. Another tip that I always say is have a consistent tone of voice. So again, as somebody working in content, one of the first things I did at my job, my role here at YAP, was to create a tone of voice. This tone of voice is something that I want to use across social media, across our email communications, any of our ads, even our website, even internal emails that we write out. But what we usually forget is that our app is literally the face of our brand. And we need to have that tone of voice go down, translate into our product voice, and so that our users can feel the same sentiment towards it that we do. Next one is proto content. A lot of you have seen lorem ipsum, you know, spewing across different apps, like till the very end. I feel like I once did a testing for an app where I was testing a lorem ipsum app, and that really threw me off because I was like, great, I know they're only testing color, but if it says lorem ipsum, you've already lost me. You know what I mean? So use proto content wherever possible. This helps the product and UX teams also create better flows. Now there's something that I know maybe Nada can vouch for is sometimes you get so lost as a designer and as a product person in the sort of world and the universe of creating something amazing that you might lose sort of a sense of reality almost. And what happens is when you have words to sort of match your design or your journey or your flow, everything just starts to make sense. You know, there's something that you had probably six screens, but maybe if the content fit in one screen and we could say everything that we wanted to, it would save that trouble. So, you know, you're reducing production lags, you're reducing, you know, the creation of extra flows, design resources, so much more. The next one is about creating a framework. Now, as with any other company that's, you know, starting out, or if you're an organization that's trying to launch in another country, expand, scale, you have to have a framework. Now, this is where I feel that a content person already has this knowledge, okay? And it's something that, as if you're let's call it a trans UX person. If you're coming into UX or you're somebody that's have been doing content for a while, this is a practice that everybody should follow regardless. Create a framework, you know, that keeps a whole repository of all your content, helps you create future-friendly content, and then this will actually help you with scalability and repurposing. And finally, don't be afraid to put your content through the grinder. You know, don't spend too much time trying to reinvent the wheel. Don't, you know, cute words are cool and quirk is always cool. And as Greta said before, there's always going to be a moment where you can add your brand essence, but that moment is not in the beginning. You know, first you have to be efficient. You have to, you know, be quick. You have to be like understandable, readable. Once that's done and you feel like, okay, this is great, and I want to now stand out from the competition, that's when you put in the quirk. Benchmark your content wherever possible. Test it as you're going. You know, test it internally. Test it with some friends. Remember that good content is the difference between amazing and outstanding. So your product might be great, but good content is really going to sort of take it to the next level. And yeah, this is me. Well, if you have any questions, I'm happy to take it to the end or after Hussam or whenever.
Yeah, maybe let's pass over to Hussam, and then we can do a big kind of Q&A with everyone. Have like, we'll do like a mini panel, you know, throw it in there. Why not?
Thank you so much. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me, first of all. And it's always great to see everyone, you know, in the industry, you know, discussing and exchanging knowledge. And this is something awesome. This is my first time attending, you know, the meetings. My name is Hussam. Thank you for Greta, first of all, for you know, allowing me to contribute a little bit. I wanted to do something different. I'm Syrian, born in Kuwait, living in UAE, so I cannot write Syrian Arabic or Kuwaiti or Emirati Arabic. I'm not a native English speaker. I'm specialized in localization and including Arabic language, which is something heavily is like rely on UX writing. And then I was working as a copywriter like most of us for more than half a decade. And then when UX concept, UX copy was new, I was called like a product writer. I was working with Dubizzle and OLX. Then I joined Careem and I became a UX writer and localization specialist. Worked closely with Greta and many of people here tonight. Currently, I work at Kafoo as senior UX writer and a localization specialist. So I wanted just to give some tips about, you know, how UX copy is important in terms of localization. So since I'm in United Arab Emirates and many startups, they have expansion plans. So I felt like I can share some of my tips. Okay, first things first. Many people, they think that I do translation. I am not a translator. I don't translate, and I will never ever be a translator. It's not because translation is something not cool, but you know, it's just like yeah, like it's like many times it's like when you call, you know, an artist, it's like a wall painter, for example, or a graffiti artist, like it's like something, you know, different, while there are, you know, some awesome people, but the others, they don't know exactly what they are doing, like Banksy, for example. So what I do is localization, and by localization it's not Arabic only. I worked with Greta and Careem. We were localizing 5 languages, actually, including one tough language, which is Kurdish. It has different alphabet and different way of writing, and then we have always, you know, the French, which is the largest, you know, language in terms of size. So if you design for French first, then you can add any language later in the UIs. Also, Arabic copy testing. In localization, we do heavily rely on user testing, even from the service design stages. When we work on the blueprint, we are the people who work on the backstage, trying to understand the audience. So instead of showing, you know, an English play, we can just add some solutions like subtitles, like the Pi Opera, for example. This is something awesome. And we can make the experience native, not to sound broken. If you can move to the next slide, please. So those are fun facts, I think. Okay, so in general, businesses and startups, they miss lots of opportunities and potentials, actually. Sometimes, you know, it's like 60% of Arabic speakers prefer browsing content in Arabic. This is a fact, and 97% in Saudi Arabia and Egypt. Those are the biggest and largest countries in the region. So by just introducing, you know, a low content or low content quality in-app as it's just a complement, we might lose, you know, a huge, you know, potential users, and it will affect, you know, profits, and will affect the whole business, actually. I have an example I keep using, Al Ain, for example, in Abu Dhabi, 90% Arabic speakers, 10% English. Any app in UAE will offer the services in Al Ain. They will not be able to reach those people, and they are losing 90%, you know, of their customers or users. So this is something very important. And then design for best practices are always based on mental models. We all have those UX books, English references, and we read Medium all the time. But that mental model that works for Western, you know, community or English speakers, it might not be necessarily correct or accurate with Arabic speakers. One of those things that I can remember, which is a very important tip, actually, in English we do not exaggerate, while in Arabic we cannot emphasize. So to compensate, you know, that we exaggerate to show the user that we care, or we give the users a value. So it's like it's very, in Egyptian, for example, they say Your Excellency, Your Highness, but it's part of their, you know, day-to-day, you know, vocabulary, which in English, if it's translated, it gives the opposite meaning. This is one important thing. Then designing for Arabic audience, it's not about translating. Actually, sometimes we may give the wrong meaning, or we may break the experience and lose them. They will drop. Many examples are like, for example, the CTA, which I will talk about it later. This is one of the most challenging, you know, points that everyone tells you no one is using. It's like no regular sentence in a CTA. Call to action applies to English, actually, while in Arabic we compensated. This is a language difference with adding the. So by you know, stating a generic information that would trigger curiosity, it's different way of thinking, different mental, actually, way of thinking that is related to a native Arabic speaker. I will talk about it also later. Designing a native UX experience in a different language, it's as important as the original language itself, as part of the app identity and tonality as well. Information that can be communicated in few words in English, it can take up to 2 sentences in Arabic, and this is something has a reason, because in Arabic we have 3 vowels, which is A, O, E, while in English we have 5 vowels. So the way to communicate and bend words is easier. So imagine how many, and in Arabic we try to justify any sentence, any clauses to short sentences by saying because and why and so forth and in order to. It's like always you have to think about this in terms of design as well. Can we move to the next one? Okay, so those are tips. Those are the real tips, actually. Usually it's like there are some different, you know, schools and methods in localization when it comes to copy. Some people, they start from the early stage, as I mentioned, from service design stage, trying to understand the audience. I have one example, which is like I didn't include it here, but it's related. So the earlier you get the copy involved, the better native experience you are offering to your target users. I'll give you an example. Many companies, they work on sprint basis, agile, okay, and then they prioritize the English for the sprint and Arabic for the sprint after. This means 2 weeks. It's 15 working days, 15 days, calendar days. And if they are, there's a campaign running at the same time from marketing side, the marketing side lost money and budget because the app was not ready in Arabic and they didn't reach the potential customers while waiting 2 weeks to update the Arabic, as they call it, and then no campaign in the market. So this is a huge opportunity that was missed, and loss of waste of time, effort, and also budget from other departments. Also, you know, it's like talking about, you know, deprioritizing the second language or a language preference in an app. Maybe it's like it's a common, you know, behavior, while valuing, you know, it's like many people in UAE, as an example, are bilingual. So if they will just do a quick comparison, you know, between Arabic and English, and they will see that it's like in Arabic, it's not as awesome or good or perfect as in English, they will feel like they are devalued. Why? It's like, and there will be, it's like just language discrimination. And then most of the companies, they will rely on tickets come from CX or customer support, and then they will have to figure out, and then they have to think where to fit it in a sprint. It will take forever to be reflected on the real app. This is something also important. Arabic typeface. Actually, I prepared before this meeting some examples from Apple about Arabic and Arabic typeface, which is the fonts used to show that even big companies, they miss sometimes those points in terms of localization and giving value to other languages. Anyone who is bilingual, if they will have a look at iOS in Arabic, they will know what I'm talking about. So Arabic typeface in general needs to be at least 4 points larger than the English one. What happens is that when you design for English and then you flip the screens from left to right and you implement the Arabic, the screens will look empty. So you will not feel, you get the same experience and feeling, and even you will not be able to complete the tasks that you came for. So this is something very important. This is my own invention. Always make it 4 points larger. If it's still small, you can make it bold. Many fonts are open source, and by practice and testing, you can see if it's working or not. But also this is part of something called design system in the startups. Design systems are you know, split it into multiple levels. It's called maturity scaling level. Each level, it requires a specific set of resources available. Like, for example, UX guideline for product, it's at level 3 maturity on design systems. It comes with inverted UI elements, back button studded keyboard in operating systems, Android, iOS, everything in place. So for the next release or any other future project, that everything will be ready. You don't have to worry or test again. So this design system saves lots of testing in the future. Then for the user experience, the good user experience, it's like if you want the product to stand out from the crowd, you can easily detect a good Arabic copy, a second language copy from, it's like translated, not to a level that Google Translation, no one is using, I think, Google Translation anymore. So, but you will feel the quality of the content, and you will get it by feedback or app reviews in the app stores. Then running researches. Many people, they use to translate actually testing sessions into another language. If you translate the language, you didn't translate, you know, the behavior, and this will affect actually the results. You were designing for a English speaker, Western mentality person, but in Arabic screens. You might miss the point, and you might cause them to drop. I don't know, do we have anything more? Okay, before that, thank you. I want to share with you some questions actually in the chat. There was a guy who was asking actually about localization tips. I have, if I shorten them into just like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things. It's very, very important for any, you know, product designer or anyone who works in startups. Numeral system, Arabic language, they use, for example, Hindi numerals, while in English we use Arabic numerals. Imagine that in Dubai and GCC countries, they use Arabic numerals, which is the English numerals. So this is a big challenge. Most of the operating systems do not support the Arabic numerology. So the best choice is to use the Arabic numerals, the one that are used in English and other Latin languages, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. One more thing, phone number onboarding, do not flip the phone number. It's like in Arabic, the numbers are read from left to right, not from right to left. Many, you know, it's like apps, they have this password, enter password, and then they flip the numbers. It's like if it's 1, 2, 3, you have to add them from right to left, 1, 2, 3, which is wrong, and they will cause, you know, increase in tickets calling the customer app to solve the problem. This is something easy. Numerals are right, left to right, not right to left. Then lunar and Gregorian calendars. This is very important part of user experience and needs lots of testing. Some countries, they use the Hijri calendar, which is the lunar calendar. And imagine, you know, you are working in an app, for example, in UAE and dealing with customers in KSA. They add their notes and they do their booking in Hijri calendar, and solutions should be made to reflect this into a Gregorian calendar. Otherwise, finance will complain. Most of the orders will be for free. It's very important and it affects the infrastructure. One more thing, capitalization. Arabic doesn't have capitalization. So you cannot use capital letters, uppercase, and some people will say, oh, try it on Grammarly. Actually, Grammarly doesn't have Arabic. Instead, we use bold or underline, or sometimes we use one exclamation mark. Other than that, it will sound like we are screaming. What else? That's it. Yeah. Any questions, guys?
That was great. So just before we go to questions, I'm just going to hand over back to Greta. She's going to bring us the ribbon. It's been amazing. All of you. Thank you. Yes. And then we'll kind of go back to questions. So the first one's definitely for you, Hussam, on that, but I just want to hand over to Greta.
Yeah, I'm just going to wrap up real quick. The localization chat can carry on forever. So let's just get through this. I just have a final thought. You know, after talking about all of this, and I think it's quite important to realize that good UX writing actually starts within our organizations, even before it reaches the eyeballs of any users. How we speak to each other while building this stuff will reflect in the final product. And Anna Picard from Slack actually said it really nicely when she said, culture inwards is how we talk to each other, and the culture outwards is how we talk to our users, which I think is really nice. It's really something, and that's what I meant earlier, you know, when we call sending credit P2P, or when we fill our emails with jargon or, you know, what's acronyms that people, new joiners will never understand, you know, like if we can speak to each other a lot more clearly and compassionately and useful, I think that would translate back into the actual product as well. So here's the wrap up. What did we learn? UX writing is the conscious consideration of the words in your product. It's actively sitting down and thinking about the words you want to use and why you chose that specific word for each thing. It's not reserved for UX writers. It's all of us who are building the product is responsible for the words as well. People scan text strategically. They don't not read. If you struggle to write good UI copy, review the UX. There might be a bigger problem behind why the text won't fit into 2 lines. Start thinking of the words right now. Don't wait for the perfect time. The time is now. And then good UX writing starts within your organization. It's less of a process and more of a mindset to start thinking of how we communicate. it's more of a culture that's really firmly embedded in how you communicate with each other. And that's it. This is all the books that I've referenced in the talk. I would really, really recommend all of them, but if I had to pick one, I would probably go with Strategic Writing for UX by Tori Podmajersky. It's really, really comprehensive. It touches, that's the one I mentioned that talked about your first 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. It even gives tips on how to write specific components like headlines, call to actions, all of these things. It touches on who UX writers collaborate with in the organization as well. So if I had to choose one, go for that one, but ideally you'll read all of them.
Awesome.
That's it.
Amazing. There was a quick question just while we have it earlier in the stage. Are you, and is everyone, Melissa and Hussam, are you happy to share the actual deck? I mean, obviously the recording will be shared, but are you happy for that to be shared? Yeah?
Yes, sure.
Awesome. So yeah, we'll make that available to everyone on the call, and we'll add it. Maybe, I don't know, you put it in SlideShare or something. We'll sort that out later. Cool. So the first question, just to keep with the last kind of thing we spoke about, again, huge thank you to all of you. Hussam, it's for you in terms of, and Melissa can probably ask it directly if she likes, otherwise I don't mind reading it.
Yeah, I mean, sure, since we're here. Hussam, so thanks a lot for your part. I know that even within the organization I work for, we are looking at Arabic sooner rather than later. But one question I get asked a lot, especially as, you know, apart from being the actual writer, also being sort of overlooking content in general, is tone of voice. So, you know how we work hard on creating an English tone of voice that's going to be on a global scale. But when it comes to localization, especially Arabic, and, you know, all the quirks that you mentioned about, you know, the sarcasm not translating properly, or the, you know, the coolness of the content not sort of, you know, getting lost in translation. What's a good way to handle localization without actually hurting the overall brand voice? Or is there a rule for this, or what are your thoughts?
We already had a challenge like this at Careem, actually. Careem now, and it's like the best choice was like, it's funny, it's a hack actually. This is a short solution. The in-app branding and banners inside the app are owned by marketing. They have the freedom to be cool, innovative, and awesome. And then for users, they can recognize that this is a marketing, you know, it's like banner. So are you hungry? Okay, order food now. It's like in a funny way. In Saudi, it will sound Saudi in their dialect, while you don't have to compromise the modern standard Arabic, the simplified language. That is the core experience of the app. So this is one option. For us now, I'm working actually on this. It's like tonality. When tonality, you know, it's like it depends on personas and users' age group. Actually, insights and proper research will help us, you know, to define our age range group, points of interest, our targeted also audience, and future plans also. So personas is one example that will help us, because you can't search for the equivalent in an Arab culture or other, you know, language, or other culture speaking different language also. You can be cool, but to a certain limit. That's why when you have, for example, a point that is like a funny line, or it's like button, or it's like just production or notification, you can think about what they are trying to do with this. So it's a humor, okay, check. Okay, they are trying to say that you didn't use the app for a long time. Okay, we miss you. Okay, it sounds okay in English. In Arabic, it might be offensive. In KSA, it might be crime. We have to be gender, you know, careful. Yeah, so think about it in Arabic. Ask your friends. It's like, okay, hey, dude, I didn't see you. Of course, no. You know, I think simplify it. Make it first just the idea, the concept, what people will talk about it, and then try to convert it into, it's like a user-friendly line. You can keep the humor, but the best practice to have this like an agreed, approved tone of voice from marketing first. We take this marketing deck with all those brand values, brand tone of voice, and then we create our product equivalent of it. What applies, what doesn't apply. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you.
Awesome. So we're just going to go back to Greta. Feel free if you have questions. You can maybe just say who you're directing your question to, if it's Hussam, Melissa, or Greta. That'd be great. So it's open Q&A, open season. So back to you, Greta. Very insightful. Thank you. My question to you is, are you or your team responsible for email copy and app store write-ups, or is that the marketing team? If it's marketing, what tips can you share with us on how to ensure the marketing team are in line with your UX writing guidelines?
I saw that question from Robert.
Yes.
Thanks, Robert. Well, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's tough. It's really tough to have two departments working on different parts of the experience and kind of defining, oh, okay, so you write the social media post that the user sees to download the app. Then once they go to the app store, that's written by someone else. And then they go into the app and that's written by someone else. So it is tricky. We are struggling with it, or I've seen mainly struggles with it. But what I also have seen is to have people who their titles are product marketing. So they're kind of the go-between the marketing team and the product guys. So they have full visibility of what kind of campaigns are running from marketing side. They have visibility of product roadmap, and then they can understand, because another thing that happens is we bombard people with messages, right? This marketing campaign is running, so people get a push message, and then we've just launched this feature, so people get another push message, and nothing is kind of people are just getting mad spam. So to have people responsible for knowing what goes on everywhere. We also have meetings, regular catch-ups between the product writers or designers, and then the marketing people, kind of just hear what everyone is working on. The marketing team, though, the brand and marketing arm, is usually responsible for the main brand voice, tone of voice, and then that would be our master voice, right? That's what you sound like. But what we do is we take that and then create principles for when you write for product from those. So we won't sound like a completely different brand, but we have different tasks to accomplish as well. So for marketing, you are writing a lot more for acquisition, come. And then for product, you are writing a lot more for accomplishing a task. So it's all about being clear. Emails. So I have, sometimes if I know that the communication is intricately linked with, a feature or it's still very much part of the experience. So let's say we want people, your credit card is expiring. So we send you a push, then it takes you to the app where you have to update your credit card. And then you get an email confirming that was done. For me, that's one product experience. So I would kind of insist on writing all of those and not go like, no, but marketing does push, so they should write the push, and then they write the email, and then I only write the app experience, So I would try to take
the funnel, yeah,
the whole flow, yeah.
Awesome. We'll keep going, just conscious of time. Try to finish it at 9 if we can. And I'm going to be a little bit selective. So some questions, apologies, are a little bit off topic, more in general about design and research. We've got lots of videos on YouTube. You can check it out. But could you answer this one? It's not necessarily in order. For organizations that don't necessarily have a budget for UX writers, what practical UX writing techniques would you recommend designers implement within their design process? lorem ipsum excluded, of course.
I think Melissa can maybe elaborate on your protocopy that you mentioned.
Sure, yeah, only because again, we didn't start off with having a UX writing position when we started the design process. What will help is, again, be the best friend of your designer, of your UX person. Literally sit with them, you know, draw out a sitemap, draw out all the content that you need to write. Sure, if you're not, you know, if you don't have a writing experience, you could always have the copy checked and tested with a bunch of users. But if you don't have a full-time writer in your organization, just start by really understanding the flow, what's in, you know, the mind of the UX person. You know, literally shadow the designer and just be that annoying person in the company that's just going to sit there and write the content there and there. Because as I said, prototyping and proto content is super important at this point. It's going to come in very handy practically. And in the future, when your organization is big enough to have a UX writer, the handover is going to be very seamless as well.
So proto content just refers to, you know, just as you'll have a prototype for your design, which is not the final one, you also have iterations of copy that you create. But yeah, some practical UX writing tips would be those three things we touched on, which is being clear, making sure every word on the screen has a job, and that the copy that you're writing is actually useful. There's a really cool video by Biz Sanford from Shopify called Designing with Words. And that's really good. She has really good tips for designers who, you know, from your wireframing stage, how to actually include real copy instead of just, you know, going with a title goes here or whatever.
Cool. Another one for Melissa. How do you create good product voice, and how do you keep it consistent across all channels? For example, social networks being more commercial and the application itself more informative.
All right, quick tip for this is always understand what your product is trying to solve in the market. So if your product is, example, a banking app, or it's an e-commerce, or it's a grocery app, just make sure what problem is it trying to solve and what solution is it trying to offer. Based on that, your product voice will sort of adopt a sentiment. Okay, so that will sort of be the overall sort of idea of what your product voice should sound like. For example, because I work in financial services, one of the main concerns or pain points that people have is, you know, the stress that comes with managing money, security, safety, credibility. So the overall tone of voice needs to be assuring, needs to be clear, not full of technical words and things like that. And how you can adopt it across different channels is basically just making sure you're true to your, I would call it like your original sentiment or your master sentiment, and then just sort of having that voice adapt to the different channels. So for social will be a bit more, you know, fluffy, creative, quirky, whereas if you're in the app, you're going to try and keep it more user-friendly and efficient. And yeah, that's really it for me.
Awesome. Yeah. Anyone wanted to add anything? Cool. So for Greta, it would be great if you could elaborate a bit more on the reading patterns. Which reading pattern do you refer to mostly to create content?
Well, Sunaya, you can read the 400-page report. No, so I think these patterns, they identified it through eye tracking tests, right? So they presented the users with different types of websites. Some of them were just, you know, walls of text. Some of them were designed a little bit better, and then they kind of tracked what happens to users' eyes. As I mentioned, multiple patterns take place in a single session, right? So you can go from F pattern, and then you get to like maybe there are styles of content, then you do the lawnmower. It sounds like a dance party. So there are multiple patterns that happen at once. The one that I've seen mostly referred when we're designing is the F pattern. Like it comes up a lot whenever we're, you know, discussing in critiques or whatever. It comes up like But remember, people read in an F-shaped pattern, so that's why we front load the content. That's why things, your titles in the app will always say something like create an account. So you start with create, not instead of saying, can't even think of something. But yeah, so putting that verb in the front, you realize that you're going to have to take an action now, and this is what you're going to do. So the example that they use in the Google talk is you have entered an incorrect password. So the most important part is the incorrect password, but it's right at the end. So, maybe you want to put that a little bit sooner. Yeah.
Cool.
So yeah, there are multiple patterns. I think the point is just to write the content in a way that it's easy to scan, and also depending on the format of the content. So your FAQ section will be a lot more, paragraphy, right? So how do you format those paragraphs to make it easy to read? And then your, if you have a menu list, those are more titles and maybe radio buttons or whatever. How do you make that easy to scan?
Awesome. A great question. One of the challenges I have from a design perspective is, B2B and B2C and the different worlds that exist there. So the question is, do you approach content differently from a B2B and B2C website or app or whatever product platform?
I'm Merwe, and this is Design Talks UX Copy, a webinar series brought.
Sorry, that's the link I'm trying to share.
Oh, okay. It'd be good to hear a few of you, even like the Arabic one as well. Like once you answer that, Hussam, from just giving Hussam some thinking time, Greta, before you answer. So from a perspective of, hey, we've got this region, huge opportunity. We just need to send our product to a translator and plug that file in, and we're gonna, monetize our product. How many times have we heard that one? So it'd be great to hear your thoughts on that. But yeah, Greta, maybe you can go first. I love that question.
Yeah, so definitely, I think related to that, not just B2B, B2C, but it's also this idea of specialist websites. So, we say things like use plain language, be clear, but if you are a website that purely caters to, let's say, programmers or extreme mountain bikers, you might have terminology in there that only apply to these people, and that's fine. That's totally fine if you're, focused on specialist stuff. And I think B2B is kind of the same. Like Melissa mentioned, trying to understand what your value proposition is. What are you solving for in the market? Your B2B solution is different than your B2C solution, even if you are a single brand with different, if you have a customer facing product and a enterprise facing product. So yeah, I absolutely do approach them differently. It's like I said, as Melissa mentioned, is what is this value proposition that we're offering, for this with this product, and then talk to that, because the users are different, right?
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah, also for localization, also in Arabic, you have to also pay attention to that. It's like some terminology are used in English, but they do not know its meaning. For example, it's like RFP or just like invoice. Even it's like for some people, they don't understand. So you have to write it in English and write the translation next to it. Some terms, it's like that might be, it's like sensitive in terms of legal, it's just like over promising. You have to be sharp and clear. So efficiency comes first here, and it's like clarity. While it's like with the customer apps, you have to be friendly, nice, trying to deliver, the info or guide them or instruct them easily. While if you take CRM systems or just like those, property tools or captain portals applications for Uber and Careem, for example, you have to speak with them professionally, the language they use. For example, while customer app in Careem, they call the trip ride. It's like book a ride. While it's like for captains, you have to use trip, because for them it's a mean of life. It's a trip, and they get fair, payment for it. You don't have the luxury and flexibility to be nice and try to deliver the info smoothly, because sometimes you have to be short and to the point. Maybe because they are professional and busy, and you have to communicate it quickly and without any, it's like extra words. When it comes to communication also, for example, emails, EDMs, all those, digital marketing, solutions, the best practice for me out of experience, it should be bilingual. So many people, they will ask their assistants to help them in it. So you have to keep in mind that it might be read by an English speaker or an Arabic speaker. And you will hit one, it's like two birds in one stone. This is from my own personal experience.
Awesome. Any other final questions or final thoughts? Maybe we'll kind of close the questions there. That's been awesome. Any final thoughts or anything you wanted to share, Greta, Melissa, or Hussam?
Thing is, I tried to mention in the beginning that we're just scratching the surface. This field runs deep, right? Just about as deep as design and research, but it's only being kind of discovered right now. So we have a lot of catching up to do with regards to, what do career paths look like? How do people like us fit into organizations? And I know it's frustrating. We constantly have to explain to people what we do, even though we were hired in that role, and it gets weird. But we have to remember that we're, quite a new field, and we're sort of pioneers in this. So we have to constantly pitch and sell what we do.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. And just to kind of juxtaposition, I got into design by discovering usability, like, I don't know, 15 years ago or something. And it was then that I discovered this is the tip of the iceberg. And underneath the ocean, you got this massive thing called design with ethnography, research, interaction, visual, and the industry was changing over that time as well. And it's kind of the same with your area, right? I think the advantage you probably have is that design has matured, but it's still to some way, I guess, a disadvantage because people don't acknowledge the depth of what you have all discussed, right? So yeah, that's a good point.
Meetup by meetup will open their eyes.
That's right. That's right. Now, massive thanks to all of you. Really, really great. And I think it would be good to add to our backlog more. There's also one of the designers in my team. He is listening. He knows he's in the backlog. Like he's Egyptian, Hussam, and I've been with him to Egypt and to Saudi as well. So localization is a great topic. Like I'd love to do that. I worked on the first Arabic website for NYU, and we did a mini site. So it wasn't just translate the whole thing. It was user research led this initiative. It's still not perfect. There was no necessarily follow-up or internal long-term resources, but doing card sorting in Arabic I got to do, and some really interesting things. So we should definitely do maybe like, a few speakers on that one. But just to bring it to next month, it'd be great again to have as many of you as possible. We've got a really interesting topic as well, which is very new also in the world, which is design ops. So what is design ops? We're going to have local leaders from Property Finder, Talabat, Emirates NBD, and YAP, as well as the consultancy world to talk about that. So very much looking forward to hopefully seeing everyone next month. We will share I know people want to see the chat, so I'm going to share the chat. We're going to share the presentation, and we're going to share the video. So thanks everyone. Really, really awesome. Again, thank you, Greta, Hussam.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Melissa, Hussam, for backing me up. Couldn't have done
awesome.
And fellow co-organizers as well. Nada, thank you. And
thank you, everyone.
Cheers.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night, everyone. Thanks so much.
Good night.